The lecture hall at the Galactic Military Academy buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of cadets from dozens of species settled into their seats. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate beings ranging from the towering Crethean warriors to the diminutive Pix scholars, hummed with excited chatter in at least 20 different languages. Today's guest speaker was something of a legend, though many of the younger cadets weren't entirely sure why. Instructor Valaxis, a seasoned Theran officer with deep purple scales and, for precisely positioned eyes, stood at the podium adjusting his communicator. His tail swished nervously behind him, betraying an emotion his face refused to show. In his 3 decades of teaching tactical warfare, he had never been quite this uncertain about a lecture. The human military had sent one of their Marines as requested, but the being who had arrived at the academy that morning was not what anyone had expected. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun walked onto the stage wearing his standard combat utilities, not the dress uniform most visiting officers chose for such occasions. He was average height for a human, which made him shorter than many species present, with a stocky build that suggested strength rather than speed. His face was weathered, marked with the kind of scars that came from real combat rather than training accidents. What caught everyone's attention, however, was his casual demeanor. He carried a large duffel bag over one shoulder and what appeared to be a beverage container in his other hand. The chatter in the hall died down to confused whispers. Several of the Crethean cadets, who stood nearly 8 feet tall and possessed natural armor plating, exchanged amused glances. The Velkari, known throughout the galaxy for their precision and discipline, looked genuinely puzzled at the humans' informal approach. Valaxis cleared his throat, his translator crackling to life. Cadets, it is my honor to introduce Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun of the Terran Colonial Marines, 3rd Expeditionary Force. The sergeant has seen action in 17 major conflicts and has been decorated for valor on 6 separate occasions. He is here today to discuss human combat doctrine and methodology. Marcus set his bag down with a heavy thunk that echoed through the hall and took a long drink from his container before acknowledging the audience. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Before we start, I gotta ask, how many of you have actually fought humans in combat simulations? About a third of the hands in the room went up, mostly from senior cadets. Good. How many of you won those simulations? Nearly all the hands remained raised. A few cadets chittered with amusement. Marcus smiled, but there was something predatory in it. Yeah, that's about what I expected. See, that's actually why I'm here. Your combat sims are garbage, and they're going to get you killed if you ever face actual human opponents. The room erupted in indignant sounds from a dozen different species. Valaxis's scales flushed a darker purple, a sign of embarrassment among his kind. He moved to intervene, but Marcus held up a hand. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to save your lives. The problem isn't your training. It's that your simulations are based on human military doctrine from our early space age. That information is nearly 2 centuries old. Humans don't fight like that anymore. We haven't for a long time. A Crethean cadet in the 3rd row stood up, his armor plates rattling with indignation. His translator rendered his deep, rumbling voice in a standard galactic. Human, I have studied your species' military history extensively. Your doctrine emphasizes overwhelming firepower, technological superiority, and coordinated unit tactics. These are the foundations of human warfare. Sit down, kid. You're half right, which means you're completely wrong where it counts. Marcus tapped a control on his wrist device, and a holographic display sprang to life behind him. It showed a barren planetoid, pockmarked with craters and dotted with industrial structures. This is Outpost Kravix, a mining colony that was attacked by Hakron raiders 8 months ago. Anyone familiar with the Hakron? Several hands went up. The Hakron were notorious pirates, known for their brutal efficiency and complete lack of mercy. Right, so you know they're no joke. 47 Hakron fighters, all veterans, armed with military-grade weapons, and wearing assault armor. They hit the outpost expecting to find civilian miners and maybe a couple of security guards. What they found instead was a human geological survey team. 12 humans, no military personnel, armed with whatever tools they had on hand. Want to guess how it turned out? A Valkyrie cadet, her crystalline features reflecting the lecture hall's lights in prismatic patterns, spoke up in her species' characteristic melodic tone. The humans were slaughtered, obviously. 47 trained warriors against 12 civilians with improvised weapons. The mathematics are quite clear. The Hackern lost 39 fighters. The remaining 8 fled the system and never came back. The humans had 2 casualties, neither fatal. Marcus let that sink in while the hall filled with skeptical murmurs. I have the combat footage if you don't believe me. Fair warning, it's not pretty. He played the recording. The holographic display showed the first moments of the Hackern assault, confident and coordinated as they breached the outpost's main habitat dome. Then, everything went wrong for them. The humans hadn't barricaded themselves in a defensive position as expected. They hadn't tried to negotiate or surrender. They had scattered into the outpost's industrial sections and started hunting. The first Hackern team disappeared when a mining laser, modified and overcharged, cut through their cover and turned 3 raiders into vapor. The second team walked into what they thought was an empty maintenance corridor and triggered an improvised explosive made from industrial chemicals. The footage showed the human who had set the trap, a young woman with grease-stained coveralls, sprinting through service tunnels with a smile on her face that could only be described as manic. More scenes followed. A human mining engineer using excavation equipment to bring down an entire section of ceiling on a Hackern squad. 2 survey scientists working in perfect coordination, one creating distractions while the other flanked enemies with a plasma cutter modified into a short-range weapon. A maintenance technician who had turned the outpost's life support system into a weapon, creating pressure differentials that sent raiders tumbling through corridors into prepared kill zones. What disturbed the watching cadets most wasn't the violence. It was the humans' apparent enjoyment. They laughed during the combat. They made jokes. One of them was heard on the recording singing something cheerful while setting up an ambush that would kill 4 raiders simultaneously. The footage ended with the surviving Hackern fleeing to their ship, their formation broken, their confidence shattered. The last image showed one of the human civilians, an older man with gray hair, casually waving at their departing vessel while holding a weapon cobbled together from spare parts. The lecture hall was silent. Marcus took another drink and let them process what they had seen. Those people had no military training. They were scientists, engineers, technicians. They had been on that outpost for maybe 6 weeks before the attack. But they survived and won because they did what every human instinctively does when attacked. They got creative, they got mean, and they absolutely refused to accept losing. A small Pix cadet raised one of her 4 arms, her voice barely above a whisper through the translator. But that cannot be normal human behavior. Surely those were exceptional individuals. That's the thing, they weren't. That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. Those were average humans having an average day that went bad. You want exceptional? Let me tell you about first contact with the Zelthine Empire. The Zelthine were known to every military cadet in the galaxy. They had been the dominant military power in their region of space for nearly 1,000 years before encountering humanity. Their empire had conquered or absorbed 43 different species. Their military philosophy was simple and brutal: demonstrate overwhelming superiority, then offer terms of submission. The Zelthine made first contact with humanity at our colony world of New Perth. They arrived with a battle fleet, 200 warships, expecting humans to recognize their superiority and immediately begin negotiation for protectorate status. Instead, the colonial governor, a guy named Harrison who had been an accountant before moving off-world, told them to leave human space immediately. Marcus pulled up another holographic display showing a scale diagram of the New Perth system. The Zelthine commander thought this was hilarious. He demanded the human colony surrender or be destroyed. Governor Harrison's response went into the history books. He said, and I quote, "You have 30 minutes to turn your ships around. After that, We're going to make you regret waking up this morning. New Perth was a farming colony with maybe 200,000 people. They had no military base, no warships, no defense fleet. What they did have was 300 years of human ingenuity, spite, and a deeply held belief that nobody gets to push humans around. The holographic display shifted, showing trajectories and timeline markers. The Zelthine ignored the warning. 28 minutes later, 42 of their warships suddenly lost power. No weapons fire, no explosions, they just went dark. Turns out New Perth had a robust network of mining satellites throughout the system, and some clever colonists had figured out how to reprogram them to release targeted electromagnetic pulses. Not particularly powerful on their own, but when you coordinate 50 satellites to hit the same target simultaneously, you can overload military-grade shielding. The Zelthine commander, now somewhat concerned, ordered the remainder of his fleet to open fire on the planet. Before they could execute the order, 17 more warships suffered catastrophic containment failures in their reactor cores. Again, no external attack. A human engineer on New Perth had been analyzing the electromagnetic signatures from his Zelthine engines and found a resonance frequency that caused their reactor safeties to disengage. She just broadcast that frequency and let physics do the rest. The cadets were leaning forward now, completely absorbed in the story. At this point, the Zelthine commander did what any sensible military officer would do. He withdrew his remaining ships to a safe distance and called for reinforcements. He also sent a strongly worded message demanding to know what kind of military installations the humans were hiding. Marcus grinned. Governor Harrison's response was beautiful in its simplicity. He sent the Zelthine commander a data packet containing the personnel records of everyone on New Perth. Teachers, farmers, doctors, shop owners, children. He included a personal message that said, "These are the people you just picked a fight with. There isn't a single soldier among them. Imagine what our actual military will do to you." The Zelthine withdrew from human space that same day. They sent a formal diplomatic mission 3 months later requesting an alliance. They're still our allies today, and if you ask any Zelthine military officer what the most important lesson in their training is, they'll tell you, never, ever underestimate human capacity for creative violence. Valaxis spoke up, his scales still showing traces of embarrassed purple. "Sergeant, while these stories are certainly impressive, they seem more like fortunate exceptions rather than standard examples of human military capability." "Do they?" Marcus reached into his duffel bag and pulled out what looked like a simple metal cylinder about the length of a human forearm. He held it up for everyone to see. "Anyone know what this is?" Silence. "This is a human emergency survival beacon. Every human ship, station, and colony has them. You're supposed to activate them if you're in distress, so rescue teams can find you. Standard piece of safety equipment, nothing special about it." He tossed it lightly from hand to hand. "It's also a weapon capable of destroying a starship if you know how to use it properly." The lecture hall erupted in disbelieving chatter. Marcus smiled and waited for quiet. "I'm not exaggerating. This thing has a power cell designed to broadcast continuously for up to 3 months. That's a lot of stored energy. It has a precisely calibrated quantum entanglement communicator capable of sending a signal across multiple light years instantaneously. And it has minimal safety protocols because it's designed to work even when everything else has failed. A human engineer on a damaged freighter figured out that if you overload the power cell just right, then direct all that energy through the quantum communicator at once, you create a localized spatial distortion that can punch through hull plating like it's made of paper. She used her emergency beacon to blow a hole in a pirate ship that was boarding her vessel, killed the boarding party, forced the pirate ship to withdraw, and saved her crew. He set the beacon down carefully on the podium. The Terra military was so impressed, they added her technique to the official survival training manual. Now every human in space knows how to turn their emergency beacon into an improvised weapon. Not because we're violent psychopaths, but because we believe in being prepared for anything. A Velcari cadet stood up, her crystalline voice carrying clearly across the hall. Sergeant Shun, are you suggesting that any common human device can be weaponized? I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it as fact. Give a human something, anything, and enough time, we'll figure out how to use it in a way the designer never intended. It's not just weapons either. We weaponize information, social structures, economic systems, even art and music. During the Frontier Wars, human psychological operations teams would broadcast Earth music toward enemy positions. Drove some species absolutely crazy because they couldn't figure out why their soldiers were becoming increasingly agitated and unable to focus. Marcus pulled up another display, this one showing a simple human dining implement. This is a fork. You eat with it. During the siege of Tannhauser Station, a human merchant marine used one as a weapon and killed 3 Corsair raiders before they could shoot him. It's in a museum now with a plaque that reads Improvised Melee Weapon. Effective range 0.5 meters. The cadets didn't know whether to laugh or be horrified. Most chose a combination of both. My point isn't that humans are inherently more violent or more capable than other species. We're not. What makes us dangerous is that we approach problems from directions nobody else considers. When you train to fight humans in your simulations, you're training to fight the way you think logical military minds should operate. Coordinated advances, clear hierarchies, predictable tactics. Real humans in combat throw all of that out the airlock and just do whatever works. We'll fight dirty, use tactics that violate every convention of warfare, and somehow make it effective. We'll turn farming equipment into artillery, medical supplies into chemical weapons, and children's toys into reconnaissance drones, if that's what the situation requires. Marcus paused to let his words settle over the audience. The lecture hall had taken on a different atmosphere now. The earlier skepticism had faded, replaced by genuine attention and perhaps a touch of unease. This isn't something you can learn from studying military history or running combat simulations. It's cultural. Humans have spent our entire existence on a planet that was actively trying to kill us in creative ways. We had predators that hunted us, diseases that evolved faster than we could develop treatments, weather that could destroy entire civilizations, and geological activity that reshaped continents without warning. We didn't just survive our home world, we conquered it and made it ours. That survival instinct, that refusal to accept defeat, that creativity in the face of overwhelming odds, it's burned into our genetic code. Every human carries it, whether they're a trained Marine like me or a farmer on a colony world. When you threaten a human, you're not just threatening one person. You're provoking a response shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure that rewarded the most adaptable, the most stubborn, and the most creative survivors. The massive Crethean cadet from earlier stood again, but this time his tone was respectful rather than challenging. Sergeant Shun, if what you say is accurate, how does one effectively train to face human opponents? Our simulations are clearly inadequate. Marcus nodded, appreciating the question. That's exactly what we're going to spend the rest of this lecture figuring out. But I'm going to warn you right now, you're not going to like my answer. He advanced the holographic display to show a complex three-dimensional maze, marked with hundreds of possible routes and obstacles. Traditional military training emphasizes learning patterns, studying enemy tactics, understanding their decision trees. That works great when your enemy fights predictably. Humans don't. The only way to train against human opponents is to throw every rule you know out the window and learn to expect the unexpected. That's not a metaphor. I mean it literally. You need to train yourself to question every assumption, doubt every certainty, and prepare for scenarios that seem utterly ridiculous until they're happening to you. Valaxis moved to stand beside Marcus at the podium, his 4 eyes fixed on the Marine. Sergeant, with respect, that seems impossible. How can one prepare for infinite possibilities? Marcus smiled again, and this time there was no humor in it, only cold practicality. You can't, but you can learn to adapt faster, think more creatively, and respond more flexibly. That's what the rest of this lecture series is about. Starting tomorrow, we're going to run some practical exercises. Nothing in a simulator, everything hands-on. I'm going to show you exactly what you're up against. And I guarantee it's going to be educational. The next morning arrived far too early for most of the cadets. They had gathered in Training Complex 7, a massive facility designed to accommodate multiple species and training scenarios simultaneously. The space was currently configured as an urban warfare environment, complete with multi-level structures, narrow corridors, and open courtyards that could be adjusted to simulate everything from colony habitats to industrial complexes. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun stood in the center of the main courtyard, still wearing his combat utilities and looking far too awake for the early hour. Around him sat several crates of equipment that had arrived during the night. Instructor Valaxis stood nearby, his scales showing a neutral gray color as he observed the gathering cadets. The students filed in, representing the Academy's most promising tactical warfare students. Creathians with their natural armor, Velcari with their crystalline precision, Therans with their multiple sensory organs, Pix with their technical brilliance, and a dozen other species, all trained in the finest military traditions their civilizations could offer. "Good morning," Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "I hope you all got decent sleep, because today we're going to put theory into practice. We're going to run a simple training exercise. Nothing complicated, nothing you haven't done 100 times before." Several cadets relaxed slightly. Standard training exercises were familiar territory. Here's the scenario. This facility represents a critical communications hub that has been seized by hostile forces. Your mission is to retake it, secure the primary control room on the 3rd level, and hold it for 30 minutes. Standard assault and defense protocol. Any questions so far? A Theran cadet raised one of his forearms. "What opposition will we face?" "Me," Marcus said simply. The courtyard filled with confused chatter. One human against 40 of the Academy's top cadets? It seemed almost insulting. A Creathian cadet, this one female with darker armor plates than her male counterpart from yesterday, spoke up. Her translator rendered her rumbling voice with crisp clarity. "Sergeant Shun, no disrespect intended, but you are one individual against 40 trained combatants. This seems less like a training exercise and more like a massacre." "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "It does seem that way. Tell you what, let's make it interesting. I'm going to give you some advantages. First, you have full tactical coordination. Use your communicators, plan your strategy, work as a unit. Second, you have complete knowledge of the facility layout. Here's the full schematic." He transmitted the building plans to every cadet's tactical display. They showed a straightforward 3-story structure with multiple entry points, stairwells, and corridors. Nothing unusual. Third advantage, you get to plan your assault while I set up my defenses. Take 30 minutes, coordinate your approach, and attack when you're ready. I'll be inside waiting for you. He gestured to the crates around him. "I'm going to take this equipment in with me. Standard human military supplies, nothing exotic or experimental. Everything I use will be gear that any human soldier might carry." Valaxis stepped forward, concern evident in his posture. "Sergeant Shun, perhaps we should start with a smaller exercise? Maybe one squad against you rather than the entire unit?" "Instructor, I appreciate your concern, but I promise you, 40 cadets is the right number. Fewer than that, and this wouldn't be educational." Marcus picked up the first crate with ease despite its obvious weight. "One more thing. The safety protocols are fully active, so nobody's going to get actually hurt. When you get hit by simulated fire, your training vest will register it, and lock your weapons for 10 seconds. Standard non-lethal training rules apply. For those of you who might be thinking this is going to be easy, let me be clear about something. Your objective is to get to that control room and hold it. My objective is to stop you. I don't have to hold any territory, I don't have to defend any specific location, and I don't have to fight fair. All I have to do is keep you from completing your mission." He started walking toward the facility entrance, carrying the heavy crate as if it weighed nothing. "Your 30 minutes starts now. Use them wisely. The door closed behind him, leaving the 40 cadets staring after him in various states of confusion and determination. The Crethean female, whose name was Thraxa, immediately took charge. Her species had natural leadership instincts, and she had topped her class in tactical command. He is one person with limited resources in a known environment. We have overwhelming numerical superiority and full coordination. This should be straightforward. A Valkyrie named Crystallix, whose thought processes operated at speeds that would make most species dizzy, chimed in with characteristic precision. Agreed. However, we should account for his warnings about human unpredictability. I recommend we split into 5 teams of 8. Team 1 and Team 2 assault simultaneously from opposite sides of the ground floor. Team 3 provides overwatch and suppressive fire from external positions. Teams 4 and 5 flank through secondary entrances once the initial assault draws his attention. A Pix cadet called Whisper, so named because her species communicated partially through subsonic vibrations, added her input through her translator. We should also deploy our sensor drones to map his positions. Humans have significant thermal signatures. He cannot hide from our detection equipment. The planning continued, with each species contributing their particular strengths to the strategy. The Therans would use their superior sensory organs to detect any traps or ambushes. The Cretheans would lead the assault with their natural armor, providing protection. The Valkyrie would coordinate timing with their precise chronological sense. The Pix would handle technical aspects of breaching and overriding any systems he might try to use against them. After 25 minutes of detailed planning, they had what looked like a textbook-perfect assault strategy. Multiple simultaneous entry points, coordinated timing, clear communication protocols, backup plans for every contingency, and overwhelming force at every stage. Thraxa reviewed the plan one final time on her tactical display. This is solid. He may be experienced, but he is still one individual against a coordinated military assault. We move in 3 minutes. All teams confirm readiness. One by one, the teams signaled their ready status. The sensor drones were deployed and immediately began scanning the building. Within seconds, they detected a human thermal signature on the second floor, apparently setting up some kind of defensive position near the western stairwell. Target located, Crystallix announced. Second floor, western quadrant. Appears to be establishing a fixed defensive position. Perfect, Thraxa said. That means he has committed to defending that location. Team 1 will draw his fire from the western approach, while Teams 2 and 4 flank from the east and south. Team 5 will use the northern service entrance to access the second floor directly. Even if he abandons his position, we will have him surrounded. The 3 minutes elapsed. Thraxa gave the signal, and the assault began. Team 1, consisting of 4 Cretheans and 4 Therans, moved toward the western entrance in perfect formation. Their weapons were raised, their movements coordinated, their communication crisp and professional. They breached the door smoothly and entered the ground floor corridor. Immediately, every light in the building went out. Night vision, activate, Thraxa commanded, and 40 sets of enhanced optics switched on, bathing the world in artificial green light. Team 1 advanced down the corridor toward the western stairwell. Their sensors showed no movement, no thermal signatures on the ground floor. The human was definitely on the second level, waiting for them. They reached the stairwell without incident and began their ascent. The stairs were clear, no traps, no obstacles. The team leader, a Crethean named Drovok, checked his tactical display. The human's thermal signature was clearly visible about 20 meters from the top of the stairs, apparently crouched behind some kind of barricade. Team 1 has visual on target location, Drovok reported. Preparing to engage. All teams, execute, Thraxa ordered. Team 2 breached the eastern entrance. Team 4 came through the southern corridor. Team 5 accessed the northern service door and started making their way toward the second floor via the maintenance shafts. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Team 1 reached the top of the stairs. Drovok raised his weapon, ready to lay down suppressive fire on the barricaded position where their sensors clearly showed the human waiting. That was when the entire western stairwell exploded. Not literally. The training facility's safety systems would never allow actual explosives. Instead, a carefully arranged array of training charges detonated simultaneously, flooding the stairwell with harmless but extremely bright light, deafening sound, and enough kinetic force to trigger every single training vest in a confined space. All 8 members of Team 1 were instantly registered as casualties, their weapons locked, their training vests flashing red. Team 1 is down. Drovok shouted unnecessarily, his voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. It was a trap. The thermal signature was a decoy. On the ground floor, Team 2 heard the explosion and immediately became more cautious. They advanced toward the eastern stairwell, weapons ready, sensors sweeping for any sign of traps. They found none. The eastern stairs were completely clear, no charges, no surprises. They ascended quickly, reaching the second floor in less than a minute. The corridor ahead was dark and silent. Their sensors still showed a thermal signature, this one near the center of the floor, where the main control room access should be. They moved forward in a standard covering formation, 2 cadets providing overwatch while 2 advanced, then switching positions. They had covered about 15 meters when the ceiling tiles fell. More precisely, when Marcus fell through the ceiling tiles, landing directly in the middle of their formation with his training weapon already firing. 4 shots in less than 2 seconds, each one perfectly placed to trigger a training vest. For more casualties, the remaining 4 members of Team 2 spun to return fire, but Marcus was already gone, having rolled behind a support column the moment his boots hit the floor. Return fire ricocheted harmlessly off the column while he circled around them, using a route that kept him in their blind spots. 2 more shots, 2 more casualties. The last 2 cadets of Team 2 tried to fall back to a defensive position, but Marcus pursued aggressively, his movements economical and precise. Within 10 seconds of first contact, Team 2 was completely eliminated. Team 2 is down. Their leader gasped into the communicator. He was waiting above us. The thermal signature was another decoy. Team 4, hearing the fate of Teams 1 and 2, proceeded even more carefully through the southern corridor. Their leader, a Valkyrie named Shimmer, had everyone check for ceiling traps, floor traps, and hidden positions. They found nothing out of the ordinary. They reached the southern stairwell and began their ascent, moving slowly and checking every step. Their sensors were registering multiple thermal signatures now, scattered across the second floor. It was impossible to tell which, if any, were real. Halfway up the stairs, Shimmer noticed something odd. There was a faint smell in the air, something chemical and slightly acrid. She raised her hand to halt the team and analyzed the scent through her suit's atmospheric sensors. Standard fire suppression foam, the kind used in the training facility's safety systems. Completely harmless and definitely not supposed to be in a stairwell. Fall back, she ordered, but it was too late. Marcus had spent his setup time not just placing decoys, but also carefully disabling safety protocols on specific fire suppression systems and rerouting them to his own control. The entire southern stairwell suddenly filled with foam, not dangerous, but incredibly disorienting and enough to trigger the facility's safety systems, which registered Team 4 as being in a hazardous environment and automatically locked their weapons. For more casualties without Marcus ever being in the same room as them. Team 5, meanwhile, had successfully navigated the service shafts and was approaching the second floor from the north. They had heard the fate of the other teams and were being extraordinarily careful. Their leader, a Theran named Kvalix, used all 4 of his eyes to scan in multiple directions simultaneously while his team advanced through the narrow maintenance corridor. They found a service hatch that opened onto the second floor and prepared to breach. Kvalix used a fiber optic camera to scout the area beyond the hatch. The corridor appeared clear, with no visible threats and no thermal signatures nearby. They opened the hatch as quietly as possible and slipped through one by one. 7 cadets made it through successfully. The 8th, a young Pix named Flutter, had just climbed halfway through when something yanked her backwards into the service shaft with considerable force. Her scream was cut off as her training vest registered a hit. A moment later, Marcus's voice came through the open hatch, cheerful and completely unbothered. 7 to go. You guys are doing great, by the way. Much better than the last Academy group. Team 5 spun toward the hatch, weapons ready, but Marcus had already sealed it from the other side and was long gone. They had no choice but to continue forward toward their objective, the control room. They advanced in a tight formation, everyone covering everyone else, sensors running at maximum capacity. They could see the control room entrance ahead, a reinforced door that stood partially open. Too easy, Felix thought. Definitely too easy. He was right. The moment they entered the control room, they discovered it was completely empty except for one of Marcus's equipment crates sitting in the center of the floor. On top of the crate was a handwritten note that read, "The control room is actually 1 floor up. Sorry about this." Before anyone could react, the crate emitted a bright flash and a loud bang, another training charge specifically designed to simulate a flashbang grenade. In the enclosed space, it was devastatingly effective. All 7 remaining members of Team 5 were registered as casualties simultaneously. Team 3, which had been providing overwatch from external positions, watched in growing horror as every single assault team was systematically eliminated. Thrax's voice came through their communicators, tight with frustration. Team 3, the objective is yours. All other teams are down. You are authorized to use any means necessary to secure that control room. Team 3 consisted of the Academy's best marksmen and technical specialists. They had been watching the building's exterior, tracking movement through windows, using every sensor at their disposal to maintain situational awareness. They had seen exactly 0 direct sightings of Marcus during the entire assault. Their leader, a Creethian sharpshooter named Krell, made a quick decision. We're not going in blind like the others. Flutter, can you access the building's internal security systems? Flutter, who despite being knocked out of the exercise early was still monitoring communications, replied immediately. Already on it. Give me 2 minutes. It took her 3 minutes, but she successfully bypassed the facility's security and gained access to the internal camera feeds. What she found made no sense whatsoever. Krell? The human isn't in the building anymore. What? I have every camera feed active. There's no thermal signature, no movement, no indication of anyone inside except our own teams. He somehow left the building without any of us seeing him. Krell's armored plates shifted in confusion. That's impossible. We've been watching every exit. I'm telling you what the sensors show. Either he's somehow masking his thermal signature completely, or he's not in the building. Thraxa, monitoring from the command position, made a command decision. Team 3, if he's not in the building, then the control room is undefended. Move in and secure it immediately. This exercise has gone on long enough. Team 3, still cautious but encouraged by the sensor data, entered the building through the main entrance. They moved quickly but carefully toward the stairwell that Flutter confirmed would take them to the actual control room on the 3rd floor, not the decoy room where Team 5 had been eliminated. They ascended the stairs without incident, reached the 3rd floor without incident, and approached the control room door without incident. Krell placed his hand on the door control, took a deep breath, and opened it. The control room was real this time, filled with computer terminals, communication equipment, and tactical displays. It was also completely empty of threats. In the center of the room stood a simple digital display, counting down from 30 minutes, apparently the timer for how long they needed to hold the room to complete the objective. Control room secured, Krell reported, not quite believing it had been this easy. No contacts, no threats. Beginning 30-minute hold. Team 3 spread out through the room, taking up defensive positions covering all entrances. Krell positioned himself at the primary terminal and activated the communication system as per the mission requirements. 29 minutes remaining. Something is wrong, one of the Valkyrie team members said. This is too simple. Where is he? Maybe he actually did leave the building, another suggested. Maybe the whole point was to teach us not to overthink things. 25 minutes remaining. They maintained their positions, weapons ready, scanning constantly for any sign of Marcus. The building's sensors still showed no other thermal signatures. The security cameras showed no movement anywhere in the facility except for the knocked-out cadets from previous teams slowly making their way outside. 20 minutes remaining. Perhaps we actually beat him, Krell said cautiously. 40 trained military cadets against one human. Even with all his tricks, we did have numerical superiority. 15 minutes remaining. The team began to relax slightly, though they maintained their defensive positions. Krell allowed himself a small smile. They were going to complete the objective. They were going to prove that despite Marcus's warnings, standard military tactics could indeed overcome human unpredictability. 10 minutes remaining. That was when every single terminal in the control room simultaneously displayed the same message. Look up. All 8 members of Team 3 looked up at the ceiling. Marcus was there, pressed flat against the ceiling tiles in a position that should have been physically impossible to maintain, his training weapon already aimed at them. How long? Was all Krell managed to say before Marcus opened fire. 8 shots, 8 casualties, less than 3 seconds of firing. Marcus dropped from the ceiling with perfect grace, landing lightly on his feet in the center of the control room. He walked to the primary terminal and pressed a button, stopping the countdown with 5 minutes still remaining. His voice came through every cadet's communicator, addressed to everyone in the exercise. Lesson complete. Everyone meet me in the courtyard for debrief. And someone bring water. You're all going to need it after I explain exactly what just happened to you. The 40 cadets, their training vests now unlocked and their weapons reactivated, made their way back to the courtyard in various states of shock, confusion, and embarrassment. Marcus was already there, sitting casually on one of his equipment crates with his canteen in hand. When everyone had assembled, including Instructor Valaxis, whose scales were showing a distinctly impressed shade of silver, Marcus stood up and addressed them. Okay, let's break down what happened. First question, who can tell me the biggest mistake you made? Marcus walked to the center of the courtyard, his boots making soft sounds on the pavement as 40 pairs of eyes tracked his movement. The cadets were tired, frustrated, and confused, but they were also paying attention in a way they hadn't been during yesterday's lecture. Nothing focused the mind quite like practical defeat. Let me tell you what actually happened in there, Marcus said, pulling up a holographic replay of the entire exercise on the courtyard's display system. This is going to hurt your pride, but that's part of learning. The replay began showing Marcus entering the facility with his equipment crates 30 minutes before the assault began. The cadets watched as he moved quickly and efficiently through the building, setting up his various tricks and traps. First thing I did was establish that none of you could actually track me properly. You were all relying on thermal sensors, which is great except that humans figured out how to defeat thermal detection about 300 years ago. He pointed to the replay, showing him placing several devices around the building. These are thermal decoys. Cheap, easy to make, emit a heat signature identical to a human body. Cost me about 5 credits each. Crystalix, the Valkyrie coordinator, spoke up with characteristic precision. But our sensors are military grade, designed to differentiate between genuine thermal signatures and simple heating elements. They are, Marcus agreed, which is why these aren't simple heating elements. They're full-spectrum thermal mimics with realistic heat distribution patterns, pulse rates that simulate breathing, and even programmed movement patterns. To your sensors, they looked exactly like me crouching in various positions around the building. He advanced the replay to show him setting up the trap that eliminated Team 1. While you were planning your assault, I was analyzing your team composition and predicting your most likely approach vectors. Creathians leading the assault was obvious. You guys are natural shock troops, and everyone knows it. Heavy armor, strong, intimidating. Standard doctrine says put your toughest people on point. So I knew Team 1 would be mostly Creathians, and I knew you'd send them to draw my fire while other teams flanked. The western stairwell was the most obvious approach to the thermal signature I'd placed, so that's where I set the ambush. Not complicated, just thinking one move ahead of standard tactics. Thrax's armor plates shifted in annoyance. You deliberately made us think we were being clever by flanking while we were actually doing exactly what you wanted. That's the idea, Marcus said without a trace of apology. Humans call it controlling the engagement space. Make your enemy think they're making good tactical decisions while actually pushing them exactly where you want them. It's not about being smarter than your opponent. It's about understanding how they think and using that against them. The replay showed Team 2 advancing into the eastern corridor and Marcus dropping from the ceiling. Several cadets winced at seeing how quickly he had eliminated the entire team. Team 2 made the mistake of trusting their sensors too much and their instincts too little. The corridor was too quiet, too empty, too perfect. A few of you actually hesitated, I saw in the recordings. Your gut told you something was wrong, but you ignored it because your sensors said everything was clear. He looked directly at the Team 2 leader. Humans have a saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. That applies double in combat situations. When everything is going perfectly according to plan, that's usually when things are about to go catastrophically wrong. As for hiding in the ceiling, that's basic infiltration technique. Most species, when they clear a room, focus on horizontal sightlines. They check corners, doorways, windows, maybe behind furniture. Very few species instinctively look up, because most species don't have natural predators that attack from above. Almost do. We evolve alongside creatures that would drop from trees or cliff faces to ambush us. Looking up is part of our survival instinct. A young Pix cadet raised one of her arms tentatively. But, Sergeant Chun, how did you even get up there? The ceiling shouldn't support your weight. Marcus smiled. It doesn't, at least not directly. I use the support beams and structural frames. There are maintenance spaces in all these buildings because various species require different atmospheric controls, different gravity plating, different life support systems. Humans are smaller and more flexible than most military species, so we can access spaces you literally can't fit into. I've spent the last decade learning how to use that to my advantage. The replay showed Team 4's elimination via fire suppression foam. Several cadets actually laughed at that one, despite their frustration. This one I'm particularly proud of, Marcus admitted. Fire suppression systems exist in every military facility in the galaxy because safety is universal. They're also universally ignored because they're just part of the background, something that's always there, but never actually relevant. I spent maybe 10 minutes rewiring one section of the system to respond to my remote control instead of smoke detection. Not complicated, just tedious. But nobody ever thinks to check safety systems for tampering. He paused the replay. That's another fundamental difference between human tactical thinking and what you're taught here. You're trained to assess military threats, weapons, soldiers, defensive positions, strategic objectives. Humans assess everything as a potential threat or tool. Life support systems, gravity plating, door controls, lighting, communication arrays, even the building's structural integrity. Everything is either a weapon we can use or a weakness we can exploit. Kvalix, the Theron who had led Team 5, spoke up. What about the service shafts? How did you know we would use that approach? I didn't, Marcus said simply. I had traps set for 6 different infiltration routes. The service shaft just happened to be the one you chose. Once you opened that hatch, motion sensors alerted me, and I repositioned to intercept. The important thing wasn't predicting your exact path. It was being prepared for multiple possibilities and staying mobile enough to respond to whatever you actually did. That's something else humans excel at, adaptive response. We don't make rigid plans that fall apart when the enemy does something unexpected. We make flexible plans with multiple contingencies, and we're comfortable abandoning them completely if the situation changes. You spend days or weeks training for specific scenarios. Humans train to handle scenarios we can't even imagine yet. The replay showed the final elimination of Team 3 in the control room. Even knowing what was coming, several cadets still found it shocking to see Marcus somehow pressed against the ceiling in a position that defied their understanding of human physiology. Team 3 did everything right, Marcus said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. You cleared every room, checked every corridor, confirmed the objective location, and maintained defensive positions throughout the whole period. You should have one. But, Krell prompted, but you made one critical assumption that cost you everything. You assumed I was trying to stop you from reaching the control room. I wasn't. My objective was to keep you from holding it for 30 minutes. There's a difference. He zoomed in on the replay, showing him entering the control room several hours before the exercise even began during the facility setup. I came in through the ventilation system during prep time, established a position in the ceiling supports, and waited. When you entered the room and started your hold timer, I was already there. I'd been there for hours. As for the physical position, yes, it's uncomfortable, but any human with basic military training can hold that stance for extended periods if properly braced against structural supports. It's not fun, but neither is losing a firefight because you weren't willing to be uncomfortable for a few hours. The courtyard was silent as the cadets absorbed the full extent of how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. It wasn't that any individual trick had been particularly sophisticated. It was the combination, the preparation, the willingness to use every possible advantage, no matter how minor or unconventional. Instructor Valaxis finally spoke, his scales showing a complex pattern that mixed admiration with concern. Sergeant Shun, while your performance was undeniably effective, these tactics seemed to require extensive preparation time and detailed knowledge of the terrain. How would human forces perform in a more dynamic engagement where such preparation is impossible? Great question, Marcus said. He pulled up a different set of data on the holographic display. 6 months ago, a human exploration vessel named the Wanderer made first contact with an unknown species in the outer reaches. The species, which we now call the Razakai, immediately attacked without warning or provocation. The Wanderer was a survey ship with minimal weapons, no military escort, and a crew of 23 civilians and 3 security personnel. The display showed the initial attack. The Razakai had swarmed the human ship with 40 fighter craft, intent on destroying or capturing it. The engagement should have lasted minutes, ending with the complete destruction of the outmatched human vessel. The Wanderer's captain, a woman named Sarah Okonkwo, who had never been in combat in her entire life, realized she couldn't outrun or outfight the Razakai. So she stopped trying to do either. Instead, she analyzed their attack patterns for exactly 30 seconds, identified a pattern in their formation flying, and deliberately piloted her ship directly into the center of their formation. The recording showed the moment the Wanderer dove straight into the middle of the Razakai fighters, forcing them to scatter to avoid collision. Their tight formation broke apart into chaos as 40 craft tried to avoid both the human ship and each other. In those 5 seconds of chaos, the Wanderer's weapons officer took out 12 Razakai fighters. Not because he was particularly skilled, but because they were suddenly presented in individual targets rather than a coordinated formation. The remaining Razakai fighters tried to reform, but Captain Okonkwo kept her ship moving erratically, forcing them to either maintain distance or risk collision. This went on for 8 minutes. The human ship would charge directly at the Razakai formations, scatter them, pick off whoever got isolated, then repeat. It shouldn't have worked. The Razakai had overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, but nobody had ever attacked them like that before. Nobody had ever turned their own coordination into a weakness. Marcus advanced the recording to show the final moments of the engagement. The Razakai fighters, reduced to fewer than 15 craft and completely disorganized, suddenly received new orders and withdrew from the system entirely. The Razakai fled because they didn't understand what they were fighting. They had spent centuries perfecting coordinated fighter tactics based on mathematical precision and predictable maneuvers. Then, they encountered a human who fought like a drunk person throwing punches in a bar fight. No technique, no elegance, just chaotic aggression that was impossible to predict or counter. Captain Okonkwo survived with her ship damaged, but intact, her crew shaken, but alive, and a place in human military history as the woman who won a battle by fighting so badly that the enemy didn't know how to respond. A Velkari cadet, her crystalline features showing patterns of deep thought, spoke up. "Sergeant, I believe I understand what you are trying to teach us. Humans succeed in combat not through superior training or technology, but through unpredictability and willingness to use unconventional tactics." "Close," Marcus said, "but not quite accurate. We don't succeed because we're unpredictable. We succeed because we're adaptable. There's a difference. Unpredictability is just being random. Adaptability is changing your approach based on what the situation requires." He began pacing, clearly warming to his topic. "Every species in this academy, hell, every species in the galaxy, has refined their military doctrine over centuries or millennia. You figured out what works best for your particular physiology, psychology, and cultural values. Creathians use shock assault tactics because you're naturally strong and well-armored. Velkari favor precision and coordination because your species thinks in mathematical certainties. Therans use sensory superiority to maintain information dominance. All of these approaches are valid and effective. The problem is they're also predictable. Once an enemy knows how you fight, they could develop counters. You can see it in galactic military history. Species develop a dominant tactical doctrine, then another species figures out how to beat it, then the first species adapts their doctrine to counter the counter, and it becomes this endless back and forth of refinement. Humans don't do that. We can't. Our species never developed a single dominant way of warfare because we spent our entire evolutionary history fighting each other. Different human cultures developed completely different ways of combat, and we spent thousands of years testing them against each other. Rigid formations, guerrilla tactics, cavalry charges, siege warfare, naval combat, aerial bombardment. You name it, some group of humans tried it, and some other group of humans figured out how to beat it. By the time we reached space, we didn't have a unified military doctrine. We had dozens of them, hundreds if you count all the variations, and we'd mix them all together into this chaotic mess where anything and everything was considered valid if it worked. That's what makes human forces so difficult to fight. You can't predict our tactics because we don't even know what we're going to do until we assess the situation. Marcus stopped pacing and faced the assembled cadets directly. "That's what I'm trying to teach you. Not how to fight like humans, because you can't and shouldn't. Your own methods work well for you. What you need to learn is how to fight against enemies who don't follow any predictable pattern, who will use strategies that violate conventional military wisdom, and who consider every rule of warfare to be a suggestion rather than a law." Thraxa stood up, her massive frame imposing even in the outdoor courtyard. "Sergeant Shun, with respect, what you describe sounds like military chaos. How can human forces coordinate effectively if every unit is improvising independently?" "Now, that's the right question," Marcus said with approval. "We don't improvise independently. We improvise cooperatively. Every human military unit trains extensively in communication, in understanding commander's intent, and in trusting each other to make good decisions independently. When I was fighting you today, I was one person. But in a real combat situation, I'd be part of a unit where everyone else is doing the same thing I was doing, and we'd all be coordinating our chaos to achieve a unified objective." He pulled up another recording, this one showing a human marine company in action during what the file labeled as the Battle of Tarsus IV. "Watch this engagement. Human forces were outnumbered 3-1, defending a colony world against raiders. Standard tactics would have been to consolidate defensive positions and hope reinforcements arrived in time. The recording showed something very different. Human units were scattered across the entire battlefield, each one operating independently, using terrain features, civilian structures, and even local wildlife to create opportunities for ambush and harassment. There was no defensive line, no central command post, no obvious coordination. Yet, as the battle progressed, it became clear that the apparently random human actions were anything but. Each unit's movements supported other units without ever being in direct contact. When one group drew enemy fire, another group would attack from an unexpected angle. When enemies tried to flank, they'd find themselves walking into positions that other human units had already prepared. The entire battlefield was a three-dimensional chess game where the human pieces were all making their own decisions, but somehow working in perfect harmony. This is what we call distributed operations, Marcus explained. Every unit commander, down to individual fire team leaders, has the authority to make tactical decisions. They don't wait for orders from higher command. They assess, decide, and act. Higher command provides overall objectives and strategic guidance, but tactical execution is left to the people on the ground who can actually see what's happening. It looks like chaos because you're used to seeing military operations where every move is coordinated through a central command structure. Human operations are coordinated through shared understanding of the mission and trust that everyone else knows what they're doing. The Battle of Tarsus 4 recording ended with the raiders retreating in complete disarray, having suffered catastrophic losses against a supposedly inferior defensive force. A Pix cadet, who had been quietly recording everything for later analysis, asked a technical question. How do human forces train for such operational freedom? Surely it requires years of experience to make effective, independent decisions. It does and it doesn't, Marcus replied. Yes, experienced troops make better decisions. But even our youngest, newest Marines are trained from day one to think independently, question orders that don't make sense, and trust their own judgment. We don't train people to follow doctrine blindly. We train them to understand why doctrine exists when it applies and when to ignore it completely. He gestured to the facility where they'd just completed the exercise. Everything I did in there today, any human Marine could have done. The specific tricks would be different, the exact approach would vary, but the underlying principles are universal in human military training. Use what you have, adapt to circumstances, never give up, and always be willing to try something your opponent won't expect. Instructor Valaxis stepped forward again, his scales showing a thoughtful pattern. Sergeant Shun, you have convincingly demonstrated that human tactical flexibility makes you formidable opponents. However, I must ask, are there situations where human unpredictability becomes a weakness? Surely there must be scenarios where traditional, coordinated tactics would prove superior. Marcus nodded slowly. Absolutely. Humans aren't invincible, and our methods definitely have weaknesses. For example, put human forces in a situation where strict coordination and precise timing are absolutely required, like coordinated orbital bombardment or complex multi-fleet maneuvers, and will usually get outperformed by species like the Valkyrie who think in mathematical certainties. Similarly, humans struggle with extremely long-term strategic planning that requires decades or centuries of consistent policy. Our adaptability is an advantage in dynamic situations, but a disadvantage when stability and consistency are more important than flexibility. But here's the thing. Humans know our weaknesses and we plan around them. We recruit Valkyrie officers for situations requiring precision. We hire Theron consultants for long-term planning. We learn from every species we encounter and incorporate their strengths into our own methods. That's adaptability too, just at a larger scale. He paused, looking around at the assembled cadets. Which brings me to why I'm really here. This isn't just about teaching you to fight against humans. It's about teaching you to think more like humans when the situation demands it. Your tactical education here is excellent for conventional warfare, but the galaxy is full of unconventional threats. Pirates who don't fight fair, raiders who use terror tactics, unknown species who don't follow galactic convention. You need to be able to handle all of that, not just textbook scenarios. Marcus pulled up one final image on the holographic display. It showed a memorial wall somewhere in human space, covered with names. Thousands and thousands of names. These are human casualties from the last 5 years of galactic conflicts. Every name represents someone who died because they or their opponents made mistakes in combat. War isn't a game, and it isn't an exercise. When you face real enemies in real combat, your adaptability and creative thinking will be the difference between going home and ending up on a wall like this one. The courtyard had gone very quiet. The frustration and embarrassment the cadets had felt at their defeat had transformed into something else. Understanding that the lesson today hadn't been about making them feel inadequate, but about preparing them for realities they hadn't fully grasped before. The next day's session began differently. Instead of gathering in the training facility, the cadets found themselves assembled in one of the Academy's combat simulation chambers, a massive room capable of projecting fully immersive holographic environments complete with haptic feedback and environmental controls. Marcus was already there when they arrived, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were 3 other humans, each wearing different military insignia. One was a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20 standard years old, her uniform marking her as a private first class. The second was a middle-aged man with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who'd seen extensive combat, wearing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. The third was an older woman whose uniform indicated she was a civilian contractor rather than active military. Instructor Valaxis addressed the assembled cadets once they'd all settled into observation positions around the simulation chamber's perimeter. Today's session will differ from yesterday's practical exercise. Sergeant Shun has brought colleagues to demonstrate coordinated human combat operations against a series of simulated threats. Marcus stepped forward. Everyone, meet my team for today. This is Private First Class Amy Rodriguez, fresh out of basic training with exactly 4 months of military service. This is Lieutenant Colonel James Blackwood, who has 28 years of service and has commanded operations on 14 different worlds. And this is Dr. Sarah Martinez, a xenobiology researcher who has never fired a weapon in anger in her entire life. The cadets exchanged confused glances. Why would human combat demonstration include someone with only 4 months of training and a civilian scientist? We're going to run 3 scenarios, Marcus continued. Each one will put our team against different types of opponents using different tactical approaches. The simulation parameters are set to maximum realism, which means if we screw up, we die, at least virtually. The scenarios are running on combat algorithms developed by the Valkyrie Strategic Institute, so they're legitimately difficult. Thraxis spoke up. Sergeant Shun, why include team members with such disparate experience levels? Surely a demonstration would be more effective with uniformly trained personnel? Because that's not how real combat works, Marcus replied. In actual operations, you don't always get to choose your team composition. You work with whoever is available, whatever their experience level, and you find ways to use everyone's strengths effectively. Besides, I want you to see that human adaptability isn't limited to elite special forces. It's universal across our species. He walked to the simulation control panel and activated the first scenario. The room transformed into a dense urban environment, buildings rising around them with narrow streets, creating a maze-like layout. Scenario 1. Hostage rescue. 40 armed hostiles holding 12 civilians in a fortified position. Our team's objective is to extract the hostages with minimal casualties. Standard time limit is 40 minutes. Ready. The 3 other humans took positions near Marcus, checking their simulated equipment. Private Rodriguez looked nervous but determined. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood appeared calm and focused, his eyes already scanning the environment for tactical opportunities. Dr. Martinez looked distinctly uncomfortable holding a weapon, even a simulated one. "Begin simulation," Valaxis announced. The scenario started with the team positioned at the edge of the urban area, approximately 1 kilometer from the target building. Standard doctrine would have them conduct reconnaissance, identify enemy positions, and develop a coordinated assault plan. The cadets expected to spend the next 20 minutes watching the humans carefully scout the area. Instead, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood immediately began speaking in rapid-fire English, his words translated through the observation system. "Amy, you're our rabbit. Draw attention, make noise, be obvious. Sarah, you stay with me on Overwatch. Marcus, you know what to do." "Copy that," Private Rodriguez replied. And before anyone could process what was happening, she sprinted directly toward the target building, firing her weapon in the air and shouting at the top of her lungs. Every hostile in the simulated scenario immediately oriented toward her position. 40 weapons trained on a single human running directly at a fortified position with apparently no plan and no backup. "What is she doing?" a Creethian cadet muttered. "That's suicide." Private Rodriguez reached the midpoint between the start position and the target building, then suddenly dove into a side alley and disappeared from sight. The simulated hostiles, confused by her sudden vanishing act, began moving out of their defensive positions to search for her. That was when Marcus struck. He had used Rodriguez's distraction to circle around to the building's blind side, approaching from an angle the defenders hadn't bothered to cover because it required climbing over 3 intervening structures. For Marcus, this was apparently not an obstacle. The cadets watched him scale walls, leap between rooftops, and move with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years training in 3-dimensional combat environments. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood and Dr. Martinez had taken up position on a rooftop 400 meters from the target building. Blackwood was providing tactical coordination through his communicator, while Martinez, despite her obvious discomfort with weapons, was operating a long-range rifle with surprising competence. "Contact, northeast corridor, 3 tangos moving to flank Amy's last position," Blackwood said calmly. Martinez's rifle cracked 3 times in quick succession. 3 simulated hostiles dropped. "Cleared," she reported, her voice shaky but functional. "Good shooting," document Amy. "You've got a clean path to the secondary entrance. Move now." Private Rodriguez emerged from cover and sprinted again, this time heading for a different section of the building entirely. More hostiles moved to intercept her, which meant fewer defending the primary access points. Marcus reached the roof of the target building and began placing what looked like small charges at precise locations. He wasn't trying to blow up the structure. Instead, he was creating strategic weaknesses that would allow him to move through the building via unexpected routes. "Breaching," he announced over the team channel. One of his charges detonated, not with a massive explosion, but with a precisely directed blast that created a person-sized hole in the roof. Marcus dropped through before the defenders below could react, landing in what the simulation identified as a storage area. He was already moving, his weapon up, before his boots hit the floor. The next 2 minutes were a masterclass in close-quarters combat. Marcus moved through the building like water flowing downhill, always taking the path of least resistance, but somehow always progressing toward the hostages. When he encountered locked doors, he didn't waste time breaching them. He went through walls or ceilings or found alternate routes. When he faced multiple opponents in a corridor, he didn't engage directly. He used grenades to create chaos, then picked off disoriented targets. Outside, Private Rodriguez had found her way into the building's ground floor through a ventilation system that should have been too small for an adult human. The simulation apparently hadn't accounted for human flexibility and determination. She emerged in the building's main corridor, behind the primary defensive positions, and began systematically eliminating surprise defenders. "Amy, you've got heavy resistance heading your way from the 2nd floor," Blackwood's voice warned. "I see them," Rodriguez replied. Instead of retreating, she dropped a smoke grenade and charged directly at the incoming hostiles. The simulation corridor filled with obscuring smoke, and the cadets lost visual tracking of what happened next. When the smoke cleared 15 seconds later, Rodriguez was alive, and 8 hostile simulations had been eliminated. How did she do that? A Valkyrie cadet asked in amazement. She fought in zero visibility against opponents who could see about as well as she could. Marcus's voice came through the observation system even as his simulated avatar continued moving through the building. Humans have spent thousands of years developing hand-to-hand combat techniques. In close quarters with limited visibility, physical combat skills matter more than firepower. Amy's not a special forces operator. She's just a regular Marine who paid attention during basic training. On the rooftop, Dr. Martinez continued providing overwatch, her rifle cracking periodically as she eliminated targets that threatened to flank the team's positions. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood maintained tactical coordination, his experienced eye identifying patterns in the enemy's response and calling out opportunities for his team to exploit. Marcus, hostage room is 2 floors down from your position, northeast corner. Amy, you're 3 corridors away from the same location. I'm reading 12 tangos between you and the objective. Copy. Both of them acknowledged simultaneously. Sarah, we need that northwest guard tower suppressed for the next 90 seconds. Can you do it? Dr. Martinez's response was a single rifle shot that took out the guard tower's occupant. Tower suppressed, she confirmed. Outstanding. All units converging on objective in 60 seconds. Sarah, and I will maintain overwatch and cover your withdrawal once you have the hostages. The simulation had been running for 8 minutes. Marcus and Rodriguez reached the hostage room from different directions at almost the same moment. The room's guards, already disoriented by the chaos throughout the building, were completely unprepared for simultaneous assaults from 2 directions. The human team eliminated all 4 guards in less than 3 seconds. Hostages secure, Marcus reported. Beginning extraction. Getting the hostages out should have been the most difficult part of the operation. 12 frightened civilians needing to move through a building still containing over 20 hostile forces. The standard approach would be to fight a defensive retreat, covering the civilians as they slowly made their way to safety. The humans, naturally, didn't do anything standard. Amy, take the civilians down to the ground floor and out through the kitchen area. The fire there cleared out the defenders, and the path should be relatively clean. Wait, what fire? Rodriguez asked. The one I'm about to start. Give me 20 seconds, then move. Marcus had apparently been carrying incendiary devices because sections of the 2nd floor suddenly began burning vigorously. The simulation's fire suppression systems activated, filling corridors with foam and triggering alarm systems that added to the general chaos. Defenders moved away from the flames, creating exactly the opening Rodriguez needed to escort the hostages to safety. 14 minutes into the simulation, all 12 hostages were clear of the building, and the human team had reassembled at the extraction point. Final casualties: 3 enemy combatants wounded but alive, 37 eliminated. Human casualties: 0. Civilian casualties: 0. The simulation ended, and the room returned to its neutral state. The 4 humans stood in the center, breathing hard but clearly satisfied with their performance. The assembled cadets were silent, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Instructor Valaxis found his voice first. That was remarkable. Your team completed a 40-minute scenario in 14 minutes with 0 friendly casualties. However, your tactics seemed remarkably chaotic. Private Rodriguez, did you have any plan when you charged that building alone? The young private shrugged. My job was to draw attention and create opportunities. The plan was basically to be loud, be obvious, and trust that Colonel Blackwood and Sergeant Chun would know what to do with the openings I created. Everything else I just figured out as I went. You used smoke grenades to engage enemies in close quarters combat, a Crethean cadet said accusingly. That eliminates your visual advantage as well as theirs. Why would you choose to fight blind? Rodriguez smiled. Because I trained in blind fighting and assumed they didn't. Humans practice combat techniques in all sorts of conditions. darkness, smoke, underwater, zero gravity, you name it. We figure if we can fight effectively in terrible conditions, then we have an advantage whenever terrible conditions happen. Plus, fighting in smoke sounds really cool, so that was a bonus. Dr. Martinez, Crystalix addressed the civilian scientist. You displayed considerable marksmanship skill despite claiming no combat experience. How is this possible? The older woman looked embarrassed. I go hunting sometimes back on Earth. Mostly deer and elk. I've never shot at anything that shoots back before today, and honestly, I was terrified the entire time. But Colonel Blackwood told me where to aim and when to shoot, and I just focused on the technical aspects rather than thinking about what I was actually doing. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood added context. Human civilian populations often have significant weapons familiarity even without military training. Hunting, sport shooting, self-defense practice, all of these are common civilian activities. It means we have a larger pool of people who can contribute in combat situations if needed, even if they're not trained soldiers. Marcus stepped forward. The important thing to understand about that scenario is that we succeeded not because we're individually superior to those simulated opponents, but because we worked together in ways they couldn't predict. Amy created chaos. I exploited it. Sarah provided precision fire support, and Colonel Blackwood coordinated everything. None of us could have done it alone. Ready for scenario 2? He asked. This time the simulation loaded a completely different environment. Open terrain, minimal cover, and long sight lines. The tactical situation appeared on everyone's displays. Human team defending a position against an assault by numerical superior forces using armored vehicles. This scenario is designed to favor the attackers, Valaxis explained. Defensive positions in open terrain against mechanized assault are extremely difficult to hold. Standard doctrine recommends retreat to more defensible positions. Yeah, that's probably smart, Marcus agreed. We're going to hold here anyway. Begins simulation. The scenario started with the human team positioned around a small outpost in the center of an open plain. No significant terrain features, no buildings to use for cover, just flat ground extending in all directions. In the distance, the simulation showed 48 enemy infantry supported by 6 armored vehicles advancing in textbook formation. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood assessed the situation for approximately 5 seconds. Right. We can't outfight them conventionally, so we won't try. Sarah, start running calculations for environmental manipulation. Amy, you're with me on vehicle interdiction. Marcus, you know what to do. Marcus was already digging. Not a proper defensive trench, but rather a series of shallow depressions scattered around the position in what looked like a random pattern. Private Rodriguez joined him, and together they created what appeared to be completely inadequate defensive works. Dr. Martinez was staring at her tactical tablet, running simulations. Colonel, if we can generate enough thermal differential in the soil, we might be able to create localized atmospheric disturbances. English Doc, Blackwood said with a slight smile. We can make dust devils. Probably several of them if we use the outpost power systems correctly. Outstanding. Make it happen. The attacking force was halfway across the plain now, their vehicles churning up dust as they advanced. The human team appeared hopelessly outmatched. Then, Dr. Martinez activated whatever she'd been programming into the outpost systems. The ground in several locations began heating rapidly, creating rising columns of air that interacted with the planet's natural wind patterns. Within 30 seconds, 3 dust devils had formed, spinning columns of dirt and debris that began moving erratically across the battlefield. The attacking vehicles altered their formation to avoid the dust devils, which meant they were no longer advancing in coordinated groups. Their formation fragmented into individual vehicles with infantry support scattered between them. Now, Blackwood said calmly. Marcus and Rodriguez opened fire, but not at the vehicles or the infantry. They were shooting at the ground in front of the advancing vehicles, specifically at spots where they'd scattered some kind of powder from their equipment packs. Each shot created a small explosion and a cloud of particles that billowed up into the dust devils. "What are they shooting at?" a cadet asked. "Powdered magnesium mixed with oxidizer," Marcus's voice explained through the combat channel. "Burns really hot and really bright when ignited. The Dust Devils are spreading it through their formation." The battlefield suddenly lit up with brilliant white light as burning magnesium was distributed by the Dust Devils across the entire enemy formation. The simulated opponents' visual sensors were overwhelmed, their thermal imaging became useless, and their coordination broke down completely as they essentially became blind. "Amy, left flank vehicle is immobilized. You're up." Private Rodriguez sprinted across open ground toward the disabled vehicle. This seemed suicidal until the cadets realized the defenders couldn't see her through the burning magnesium cloud. She reached the vehicle, attached something to its undercarriage, and sprinted back. The vehicle exploded, not from her charge, but because she'd somehow rerouted its own ammunition to its fuel system. The second scenario continued with increasing absurdity from a conventional military perspective. The remaining 5 armored vehicles were scattered across the battlefield, their crews blinded by the burning magnesium, while their supporting infantry had lost all coordination. What should have been a straightforward mechanized assault had become chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood maintained his position at the outpost's central hub, calmly directing operations like a conductor leading an orchestra. Marcus, Northeast vehicle, is attempting to withdraw. Make it regret that decision. "Sarah, can you generate a second set of thermal disturbances?" "Already working on it," Dr. Martinez replied, her fingers moving across her tactical tablet. "But, Colonel, I need to warn you that I'm pushing the outpost power systems beyond safety tolerances. We're going to lose environmental controls soon." "Understood. We don't need to hold out forever, just long enough to break their assault." "Do it." More Dust Devils formed, these ones larger and more violent than the first batch. They moved across the battlefield like angry spirits, picking up debris and spreading the burning magnesium even further. Several simulated enemy soldiers were literally picked up by the wind and hurled across the plain. Marcus had somehow gotten behind enemy lines during the chaos. The cadets watching couldn't figure out how he'd moved that far that fast without being detected, but there he was, systematically sabotaging vehicles from behind while their crews focused on the threats they could see ahead of them. Private Rodriguez, meanwhile, had discovered that the shallow depressions they'd dug earlier weren't random at all. They formed a network of protected movement channels that allowed her to traverse the battlefield while staying below the enemy sight lines. She used this network to reach isolated enemy infantry groups and eliminate them with quick, brutal efficiency. 3 vehicles disabled, 2 retreating, Blackwood reported. Enemy infantry at 60% strength and showing signs of breaking. "Sarah, kill the thermal manipulation. Let them see what they're up against." The Dust Devils died down, and the burning magnesium began to fade. The attacking force, what remained of it, could finally see the battlefield clearly again. They found themselves scattered, disorganized, missing most of their armored support, and facing human opponents who had somehow gotten behind, beside, and in some cases above them. The simulated enemy commander apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. The remaining forces withdrew in disorder, leaving behind disabled vehicles and scattered equipment. The scenario ended with the human team still holding the outpost. Total time, 19 minutes. Enemy casualties, 84%. Human casualties, 0, though the outpost's environmental systems were completely destroyed and would need extensive repairs. The simulation chamber returned to its neutral state. Dr. Martinez was breathing heavily, clearly exhausted from the stress. Private Rodriguez had what could only be described as a manic grin on her face. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood looked calm and professional, as if he'd just completed a routine training exercise rather than an impossible defensive scenario. Marcus was checking his equipment, already preparing for the next challenge. Instructor Valaxis's scales had shifted through several colors during the scenario, finally settling on a pale silver that indicated genuine confusion. Sergeant Shun, your team just won a scenario that our tactical computers rated as having a less than 1% chance of successful defense. Yeah, that's about right. Marcus agreed. Those odds assumed we'd fight conventionally. Once you throw conventional tactics out the window, the odds change significantly. A Velcari cadet stood up, her crystalline features showing complex interference patterns that suggested deep thought. But you used environmental manipulation, improvised weapons, and tactics that required knowledge of theoretical physics. How can such methods be considered standard military doctrine? Dr. Martinez answered, surprising everyone. Because every human gets basic education in sciences, engineering, and practical problem solving. I'm a xenobiology specialist, but I took the same core courses in physics and chemistry that every human student does. When Colonel Blackwood asked me to create thermal disturbances, I just applied undergraduate level thermodynamics and fluid dynamics. It's not advanced knowledge. It's just being willing to use what you know in unexpected ways. That's the real difference, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood added. Your military training is separate from your general education. You learn to be soldiers in one context and scholars in another. Human education integrates everything. Every Marine knows basic science because it might save their life someday. Every scientist knows basic combat principles because peaceful research stations have a habit of becoming not peaceful without warning. Thraxa, who had been carefully analyzing both scenarios, asked a pointed question. Colonel Blackwood, your team's success seems to rely heavily on coordination and trust. How do you develop such teamwork between personnel who have never worked together before today? Our military doctrine emphasizes extended unit cohesion training that takes months or years to develop. That's a fair question, Blackwood replied. The four of us met approximately 3 hours before this demonstration began. We've never worked together before, and after today, we'll probably never work together again. Our coordination doesn't come from personal familiarity. It comes from shared training principles and communication systems that every human military member learns. He gestured to Marcus. The sergeant and I use different terminology sometimes, come from different service branches, and have trained on different worlds. But we both learned the same fundamental principles of human tactical doctrine. Assess quickly, communicate clearly, trust your teammates, and adapt constantly. Private Rodriguez learned the same things in basic training just 4 months ago. Those principles let us work together effectively even without prior coordination. Dr. Martinez is the interesting case, he continued, nodding toward the scientist. She has no military training at all, but she understands the principle of supporting a team objective and applying her skills in whatever way proves useful. When I asked her to calculate thermal disturbances, she didn't question why or demand detailed explanations. She trusted that I wouldn't ask her to do something without good reason. So she focused on solving the problem I presented. Marcus took over. That's another key difference between human military culture and what you're taught here. Your training emphasizes hierarchy and following orders from superior officers who have earned their authority through experience and expertise. Human training also has hierarchy and respects experience, but we fundamentally trust that every individual, regardless of rank, is capable of making good decisions and contributing meaningfully to mission success. Private Rodriguez is barely out of basic training, but I trust her judgment in combat situations because I know she was trained to think independently and make smart choices. Dr. Martinez is a civilian, but I trust her to apply her expertise appropriately because human culture values competence over credentials. Everyone on this team was given responsibility and freedom to execute their part of the mission however they thought best. He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Of course, we also train extensively in how to communicate when someone is making a terrible decision, but that's a different lesson." Speaking of which, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood interjected, "Ready for Scenario 3? This one's going to be interesting." The simulation loaded its final scenario. The holographic environment showed a damaged spaceship adrift in orbit around a hostile planet. According to the tactical briefing, the ship had suffered critical damage, life support was failing, and a hostile boarding party was attempting to seize the vessel. The human team's objective was to repel the boarders and maintain control of the ship long enough for rescue to arrive. What made this scenario particularly challenging was that it took place in zero gravity with limited atmosphere, and both teams would be wearing spacesuits. Combat in such an environment required completely different tactics than terrestrial operations. This scenario has a 45-minute time limit, Valaxis announced. Historically, it has a 22% success rate among our cadets. Good to know, Marcus said. We're the hostiles. Hakron Raiders. Same species that attacked the mining colony you mentioned in your first lecture. They're specifically chosen for their experience in zero-gravity boarding actions. Perfect, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he found this anything but perfect. Amy, you're on damage control. Keep the ship functional long enough for us to finish this. Sarah, medical support and backup engineering. Colonel, you're with me on combat operations. Wait, Rodriguez said. You want me doing damage control during a combat scenario? I barely passed my engineering certifications. And yet you're the person I trust to keep this ship's life support running while we're busy shooting pirates. You'll figure it out. You always do. The scenario began. The four humans were scattered across different sections of the damaged ship, apparently caught off guard by the boarding action. The Hakron Raiders were already inside the vessel, moving in coordinated teams toward critical systems, engineering, bridge, and life support. Private Rodriguez immediately abandoned any thought of joining the combat operations and instead headed for the ship's engineering section at maximum speed. The zero-gravity environment clearly made her uncomfortable, but she adapted quickly, using handholds and push-offs to navigate through corridors. She reached engineering to find it already occupied by 3 Hakron Raiders who were attempting to disable the ship's reactor. Standard protocol would be to call for backup, but Rodriguez apparently didn't feel like waiting. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from a wall mount, used its discharge as thrust to propel herself across the compartment, and slammed into the first Raider with enough force to send both of them tumbling. The other 2 Raiders turned to engage, but Rodriguez was already moving again, using the three-dimensional nature of zero-gravity to attack from angles they didn't expect. She didn't fight like someone with formal combat training. She fought like someone who'd grown up in zero-gravity environments and understood instinctively how to use momentum and positioning. Within 30 seconds, all 3 Raiders were disabled, and Rodriguez was examining the engineering controls they'd been trying to sabotage. Colonel, I've got a problem. They damaged the main reactor's control systems before I could stop them. I can keep it running, but it's going to require manual regulation for the rest of the scenario. Can you shoot while you're doing that? Blackwood's voice came back. Probably not accurately. Then focus on keeping us alive. We'll handle the shooting. In another section of the ship, Marcus and Blackwood had linked up and were moving toward the bridge where the main Raider force had concentrated. They moved through the ship with practiced ease, using magnetic boots when they needed stability and switching to free movement when speed was more important than control. A team of 5 Hakron Raiders intercepted them in a junction between 2 corridors. The ensuing firefight was unlike anything the watching cadets had seen before. In zero gravity, cover wasn't about hiding behind objects, but rather about using three-dimensional positioning to make yourself a difficult target while maintaining clear firing lanes. Marcus and Blackwood didn't stay in one place. They used the walls, ceiling, and floor interchangeably, constantly moving, constantly repositioning, making it impossible for the Raiders to predict where they'd be next. Their weapons fire was precise and economical, each shot calculated to account for the lack of gravity affecting bullet trajectory. The 5 Raiders were eliminated in less than a minute, but Marcus had taken a hit to his shoulder that penetrated his suit. The simulation registered this as a serious injury with atmosphere leaking from the breach. I'm compromised, Marcus reported calmly. Suit breach, losing air. I can patch it, but I'll be combat ineffective for 3 minutes. Understood, Blackwood replied. Sarah, I need you on combat duty. Marcus is going to patch himself up. Can you handle a weapon in 0G? I guess I'm about to find out, Dr. Martinez responded, her voice tight with stress. She had been in the medical bay, using the simulation's limited medical supplies to prepare for casualties. Now she abandoned that task, grabbed a weapon, and began making her way toward Blackwood's position. Her movement through the zero-gravity environment was clumsy and inefficient compared to the trained military personnel, but she persevered. She reached Blackwood just as another Raider team appeared, this one consisting of 7 heavily armed Hackran. Martinez's first shots went wide, her unfamiliarity with zero-gravity combat evident. But Blackwood was beside her, calling out corrections. Lead your targets more. Account for your own movement. Brace against the wall before shooting. Martinez followed his instructions, her scientific mindset treating the combat as a physics problem to be solved. Her next shots were more accurate. Not perfect, but good enough to make the Raiders take her seriously. Blackwood used her covering fire to reposition, flanking the Raiders from an unexpected angle. Together, they eliminated 6 of the 7 attackers. The last one fled back toward the airlock, attempting to escape. Amy, we've got a runner heading toward your position. Coming fast, Blackwood warned. On it, Rodriguez replied. She was still manually regulating the reactor, one hand on the controls, but she managed to grab her weapon with the other. When the fleeing Raider burst into engineering, she shot him without even looking away from the reactor display she was monitoring. Run her down. Also, we're going to have a reactor problem in about 5 minutes if I can't stabilize the plasma flow. Just thought you should know. Noted. Marcus status. Suit patched, returning to combat effectiveness. Where do you need me? Bridge is still occupied by what looks like their command element. Probably 15 to 20 hostiles. Feeling up for it. Marcus checked his ammunition and equipment. Yeah, let's go ruin their day. The final assault on the bridge was a masterclass in using environmental factors to maximum advantage. The bridge had taken damage during the initial boarding, which meant several systems were sparking and leaking various fluids. Marcus and Blackwood used this to their advantage, shooting at damaged systems to create additional hazards that the Raiders had to avoid. One particularly clever moment came when Marcus shot out a coolant line that sprayed super-cold fluid across a section of the bridge. The fluid froze immediately in the vacuum, creating a deadly spray of ice crystals that forced several Raiders to abandon their positions. Blackwood picked them off as they scattered. The Raiders, finally, realizing they were losing the engagement, attempted to retreat to their boarding craft. Marcus and Blackwood didn't try to stop them directly. Instead, they sealed off the corridors leading to the airlock, forcing the Raiders to choose between surrender and trying to blast through reinforced doors while under fire. Most chose surrender. A few tried to fight and were quickly eliminated. 28 minutes into the scenario, the simulation registered the last hostile as neutralized or surrendered. The ship was secure. Life support was stable thanks to Rodriguez's constant manual adjustments, and rescue vessels were inbound. The scenario ended with all 4 humans alive, though Marcus's virtual injury would have required medical attention, and Rodriguez looked exhausted from manually managing reactor controls for nearly half an hour straight. The simulation chamber returned to neutral. The watching cadets sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything they'd witnessed across the 3 scenarios. Instructor Valaxis was the first to speak, his scales showing a deep purple color that indicated profound respect. Sergeant Shun, your team has successfully completed 3 scenarios rated as difficult to extremely difficult by our combat evaluation systems. In each case, you achieved success using methods that our tactical databases would classify as highly irregular, if not outright impossible. That's humanity in a nutshell, Marcus replied with a tired smile. Achieving the impossible through highly irregular methods. Thraxa stood up, her massive armored form somehow seeming less intimidating than it had 2 days ago. Sergeant Chun, I believe I speak for all of us when I say that this has been the most educational experience of our military training. You have shown us that we were not prepared to face human opponents because we were thinking like soldiers when we should have been thinking like humans. Close, Marcus said, but not quite. You shouldn't think like humans. You should think like yourselves, but without limiting yourself to conventional military frameworks. Every species here has unique strengths. Creathians have natural armor and physical power. Velcari have mathematical precision and perfect timing. Therans have superior sensory capabilities. Picts have technical brilliance. What you need to learn is how to use those strengths in unconventional ways. He walked to the center of the simulation chamber, addressing all the cadets directly. The human military doesn't have a monopoly on creative tactics or adaptive thinking. We're just more comfortable with it because our entire cultural history is built on solving impossible problems through unconventional means. But any species can learn these principles. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood added his thoughts. The real lesson here isn't that humans are uniquely special. It's that conventional military doctrine, while valuable and important, should never become a cage that limits your thinking. Rules exist for good reasons, but those reasons don't apply in every situation. Learn when to follow the rules and when to break them. Dr. Martinez, looking completely exhausted but satisfied, offered her perspective. I'm not a soldier and I never will be. But what I learned today is that everyone has something to contribute when things go wrong. You don't need to be a trained warrior to help your team succeed. You just need to be willing to try, trust that your teammates know what they're doing, and apply whatever skills you have in service of the collective objective. Private Rodriguez grinned at the assembled cadets. And if all else fails, just charge at the problem really fast while shouting loudly. You'd be surprised how often that works. The cadets actually laughed at that, the tension from the past 3 days finally breaking. Marcus walked over to where Instructor Valaxis stood. Sir, I want to thank you for allowing me and my team to present these demonstrations. I know some of our methods probably violated about 15 different academy protocols. Valaxis's scales shifted to an amused shade of light purple. Sergeant Shun, when your people first joined the galactic community, many species underestimated humans because you were young, reckless, and refused to follow established conventions. It has taken decades for most species to understand that those qualities are not weaknesses, but rather fundamental aspects of human nature that make you valuable allies and formidable opponents. I confess that I invited you here expecting a relatively conventional lecture on human military doctrine with perhaps some entertaining stories. Instead, you have fundamentally challenged how these cadets think about warfare, tactics, and their own capabilities. That is far more valuable than any standard lecture could have been. He turned to address the cadets. All of you will take the next 2 days to write detailed analyses of what you observed and learned during Sergeant Chen's demonstrations. These analyses will be graded not on whether you agree with human tactical methods, but on how thoroughly you consider their implications for your own development as military officers. You're dismissed. Get some rest. You've earned it. The cadets filed out slowly, many of them talking quietly among themselves, processing everything they'd experienced. Marcus watched them go, then turned to his 3 teammates. You all did great, he said. Amy, that reactor management, while fighting, was legitimately impressive. Sarah, you went from terrified civilian to effective combatant in about 5 seconds. And Colonel, your tactical coordination was perfect, as always. It was educational for me, too, Blackwood admitted. I haven't worked with such a diverse ad hoc team in years. Reminded me why I love this job. Dr. Martinez laughed weakly. I'm going to have nightmares about zero-gravity combat for months. But I have to admit, it was exhilarating. Maybe I understand a bit better why you military types do this for a living. Private Rodriguez was still grinning. Can we do this again? This was the best training exercise I've ever been part of. Maybe someday, Marcus said. For now, let's get cleaned up and grab some food. Tomorrow I'm scheduled to give one final lecture on human military philosophy, and after these demonstrations, I think the cadets are actually going to pay attention. As they left the simulation chamber, Instructor Valaxis remained behind, reviewing recordings of the 3 scenarios. He would study them extensively over the coming weeks, incorporating lessons learned into the Academy's curriculum. The human demonstrations had revealed gaps in their training that needed to be addressed. But, more importantly, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun and his ad hoc team had proven something that many in the galactic community still struggled to accept. Humanity's apparent chaos was actually a sophisticated form of order that simply operated on principles different from established galactic norms. Understanding those principles and learning when to apply similar flexible thinking would make every cadet a better officer. The next day's final lecture was held in the same hall where Marcus had started 3 days earlier. The cadets filed in with completely different attitudes than they'd shown on that first morning. Where before there had been skepticism and amusement, now there was genuine respect and attention. Marcus took the stage wearing a clean uniform, looking well-rested and professional. Morning, everyone. Today's final session is going to be different. No practical exercises, no combat demonstrations. Just a conversation about military philosophy and what it means to serve. He pulled up an image on the holographic display. Earth as seen from space, a blue marble floating in a black void. Humans come from a world that tried to kill us in every possible way. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate extremes, you name it, our home world had it. By all rights, humanity should have gone extinct a dozen times over during our evolutionary history. We survived because we developed 3 fundamental traits: adaptability, stubbornness, and cooperation. We could adjust to changing circumstances faster than other species. We refused to give up even when extinction seemed inevitable. And we learned that working together made us stronger than any individual could be alone. He advanced the display to show images of humans throughout their history, working together to build civilizations, explore space, and eventually join the galactic community. These 3 traits form the foundation of human military philosophy. Adaptability means we never stop learning and never assume we have all the answers. Stubbornness means we don't quit just because something seems impossible. Cooperation means we trust and support each other regardless of rank, species, or background. Every demonstration you saw over the past 3 days was an application of these principles. We adapted to each scenario instead of forcing scenarios to fit our preferred methods. We refused to accept defeat even when the odds were overwhelming. And we worked together, combining our different skills and perspectives to achieve objectives that none of us could have completed alone. A Velcari cadet raised one crystalline arm. Sergeant Chun, these principles you describe seem universally applicable, not specific to humanity. Why then do humans appear uniquely effective at applying them in military contexts? Great question, Marcus replied. You're absolutely right that these principles are universal. Any species can be adaptable, stubborn, and cooperative. The difference is that human military culture actively encourages and rewards these traits at every level, from individual training through strategic command. Most galactic military structures emphasize hierarchy, discipline, and adherence to doctrine. These are valuable qualities that produce effective forces. But they can also create rigidity that makes it difficult to adapt when circumstances change. Human military culture tries to balance structure with flexibility, giving individuals freedom to make decisions while maintaining overall unit cohesion. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I'm not saying the human way is better. It's just different, with its own strengths and weaknesses. What I hope you've learned is that there's value in understanding different approaches to warfare, even if you don't adopt them yourselves. The galaxy is a dangerous place. There are threats out here that don't care about your species, your training, or your doctrine. They'll use whatever tactics give them advantage. If you limit yourself to conventional military thinking, but giving those threats an advantage over you. Thraxa stood up, her armored plates reflecting the lecture hall's lights. Sergeant Shun, you have spent 3 days showing us how humans fight unconventionally and successfully. But you mentioned that human methods have weaknesses. What are they? Marcus smiled, clearly pleased by the question. Human forces can be unpredictable even to our own command structures. Our emphasis on individual initiative means sometimes people make brilliant decisions and sometimes they make terrible ones. We're more vulnerable to loss of leadership than most species because we rely heavily on trust and personal relationships rather than rigid chains of command. We also tend to escalate conflicts faster than more cautious species would. Humans have a cultural tendency to meet aggression with overwhelming response, which can turn minor incidents into major battles. And our adaptability, while usually an advantage, can sometimes mean we lack the consistent, reliable patterns that make large-scale coordination easier. Every military force has strengths and weaknesses. The key is knowing yours and working with allies who complement your capabilities. That's why the Galactic Defense Accord works. Different species bring different strengths, and together we're more capable than any of us would be alone. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood, sitting in the front row, stood up and walked to join Marcus at the podium. If I may add something, Sergeant? Of course, Colonel. Blackwood addressed the cadets directly. I've served in the Terran military for nearly 3 decades. I've fought alongside dozens of species in conflicts across the galaxy. One thing I've learned is that effective military force isn't about having the best weapons, the strongest soldiers, or the most advanced tactics. It's about having people who care about the mission, trust their teammates, and refuse to quit until the job is done. I've seen Creathian warriors hold defensive positions that would have broken any human unit. I've seen Velcari coordinators manage complex operations that human commanders couldn't even comprehend. I've seen Pix engineers solve technical problems that save entire fleets. Every species has moments of brilliance that showcase their particular strengths. What Sergeant Shin has been trying to teach you is that you shouldn't limit yourselves to one way of thinking or one approach to problems. Take what works from your own traditions, learn what you can from others, and develop your own style that uses your unique capabilities. That's how you become not just good officers, but great ones. He nodded to Marcus and returned to his seat. The cadets sat quietly, absorbing the words from 2 highly experienced human military officers. Marcus continued, "Before we end this lecture series, I want to address something that's probably been bothering some of you. You might be thinking that everything I've shown you is impressive, but not really applicable to your own military service. After all, you're not human, you don't think like humans, and your military structures are fundamentally different from ours. You're right. You shouldn't try to become human or adopt human methods wholesale. That would be stupid and counterproductive. What you should do is take the underlying principles and figure out how they apply to your own species and circumstances." He pulled up a new display showing various alien species in combat situations, each one using tactics that were clearly influenced by human methods, but adapted to their own capabilities. These are operations conducted by non-human forces who trained with human advisors and learned to apply adaptive thinking within their own doctrinal frameworks. A Creathian shock assault unit that learned to use environmental manipulation to enhance their natural advantages. A Velcari coordination team that incorporated creative problem-solving into their mathematical precision. A Theran reconnaissance force that combined their superior senses with unpredictable movement patterns. All of them became more effective not by abandoning their own strengths, but by supplementing them with more flexible approaches. That's what I want you to take away from these 3 days. Not that humans are special or superior, but that adaptability, creative thinking, and unconventional approaches can make any force more effective. Learn from everyone you encounter, human or otherwise, and constantly work to expand your tactical repertoire. The lecture hall was completely silent, every cadet paying absolute attention. This was the moment Marcus had been building toward since his first demonstration. Here's my final message to all of you. he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive hall. You are the future of the Galactic Defense Accord. You're going to face threats that don't exist yet, fight battles in contexts we can't predict, and make decisions that will affect billions of lives. You can't prepare for that with rigid doctrine alone. You need to be adaptable, creative, and willing to try solutions that seem crazy until they work. Humanity joined the galactic community as underdogs. We were newer, less advanced, and less experienced than most species. We compensated for that by being willing to try anything, learn from anyone, and never accept that something was impossible. That mindset has served us well, and I genuinely believe it can serve you too, whatever your species or background. So my challenge to you is simple. Take everything you've learned here and ask yourself how you can apply it to become better officers. Not human officers, but better versions of yourselves. Question your assumptions, challenge your limitations, and never stop learning. Do that, and you'll be the kind of leaders the galaxy needs. He paused, then smiled. And if you ever face human opponents in actual combat, please remember everything I've taught you. We prefer fighting alongside our allies rather than against them. The cadets laughed, and the tension that had defined the past 3 days finally released completely. Instructor Valaxis stood and walked to the stage, his scales showing a respectful deep blue. Sergeant Shun, Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood, Private Rodriguez, Dr. Martinez, on behalf of the Galactic Military Academy, I thank you for sharing your knowledge, expertise, and unique perspectives with our cadets. This has been an extraordinary learning experience for everyone involved. He turned to face the assembled students. Cadets, you are dismissed. Remember that your analysis papers are due in 2 days. Do not take this assignment lightly. You have been given a rare gift. Direct instruction from some of humanity's finest military minds. Honor that gift by deeply considering what you have learned and how you will apply it in your future service. As the cadets filed out, many of them approached Marcus and his team to ask additional questions, express their gratitude, or simply shake hands with the humans who had so thoroughly challenged their understanding of warfare. The interactions were warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the skeptical reception Marcus had received when he first walked onto that stage 3 days earlier. Later that evening, after all the official duties were complete, Marcus found himself sitting in one of the Academy's observation lounges, looking out at the stars. Instructor Valaxis joined him, carrying 2 beverages in containers designed for his 4-fingered hands. I thought you might appreciate something to drink, Valaxis said, offering one to Marcus. It is a Theran ceremonial beverage, traditionally shared between warriors after battle. I thought it appropriate. Marcus accepted the drink with a nod of thanks. That's very kind of you, instructor. I appreciate it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Finally, Valaxis spoke. I must confess, Sergeant Shun, when I first requested a human military advisor for this lecture series, I expected someone far more conventional. Your superiors sent you instead, and I was uncertain whether you were the right choice for this assignment. And now? Marcus asked with a slight smile. Now I believe you were exactly the right choice. Perhaps the only right choice. These cadets needed to have their certainties challenged, their assumptions questioned, and their capabilities expanded. A conventional lecturer would have provided information. You provided transformation. I just showed them that there's more than one way to approach problems, Marcus said modestly. The real credit goes to them for being willing to learn. Perhaps, Valaxis agreed, but you show them by doing, not just telling. You put yourself in situations where you could fail, demonstrated techniques that could have gone wrong, and trusted that the lessons would be valuable even if the demonstrations were imperfect. That takes courage and confidence that most instructors lack. He took a sip of his beverage before continuing. I have taught at this academy for 32 standard years. I have trained thousands of cadets from dozens of species. Most of my students become competent officers who serve with honor and distinction. But the truly great ones, the ones who rise to command and make real differences in a galaxy, they all share something in common. What's that? Marcus asked. They understand that military doctrine is a tool, not a religion. They learn the rules, master the techniques, and then develop the wisdom to know when conventional approaches apply and when innovation is required. What you taught these cadets in 3 days is a lesson I usually spend years trying to impart. That true military excellence requires both mastery of tradition and willingness to transcend it. Marcus considered this for a long moment. Instructor, can I ask you something? Why did you really invite a human advisor? The Academy has access to brilliant instructors from every species in the Accord. What made you think a human perspective was specifically needed? Valaxis's scales shifted through several colors before settling on an honest gray. Because I observed that our cadets were becoming too comfortable. They learned their doctrine, practiced their tactics, and developed confidence in their abilities. This is good, but it also makes them predictable. Predictable forces are vulnerable forces. I studied human military history and saw a species that never became comfortable, never settled into predictable patterns, and consistently found ways to surprise opponents who should have defeated them. I thought exposure to that mindset would benefit our students. I was correct, though the experience was more intense than I anticipated. Marcus laughed. Yeah, we tend to have that effect. Sorry if we push too hard. Do not apologize. Challenge is how we grow. Valaxis set down his beverage and looked directly at Marcus with all 4 eyes. Sergeant Shun, I have a request. Would you be willing to return to the Academy periodically? Not for extended lecture series, but perhaps for annual demonstrations or consultations. I believe ongoing exposure to human tactical thinking would greatly benefit multiple cadet generations. I'd be honored, Marcus replied sincerely. Though I should warn you, next time I might bring an even more unconventional team. I would expect nothing less, Valaxis said with what might have been his species' equivalent of a smile. In fact, I would be disappointed by anything else. They continued talking late into the evening, discussing military philosophy, sharing stories from their respective experiences, and developing what both of them suspected would become a lasting professional friendship. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, bearing witness to an unlikely meeting of minds from vastly different backgrounds united by a common purpose, preparing the next generation for a dangerous galaxy. The next morning, Marcus and his team prepared to depart. As their transport prepared for launch, dozens of cadets gathered to see them off, a far more enthusiastic farewell than their arrival had received. Thraxa approached Marcus one final time, her armor plates arranged in a configuration that her species used to show deep respect. Sergeant Shun, on behalf of all the cadets, I want you to know that you have changed how we think about warfare, leadership, and our own potential. We will not forget these lessons. Just remember, Marcus said, the point isn't to fight like humans. It's to fight like the best version of yourselves. Take what you learned here and make it your own. We will, Thraxa promised. And if fate puts us on the same battlefield someday, I hope we fight as allies rather than opponents. I'll drink to that, Marcus agreed. As the transport lifted off, carrying the 4 humans back toward their next assignments, Marcus looked back at the Academy one final time. 3 days ago, he'd arrived as a guest lecturer with a duffel bag full of tricks and a head full of unconventional ideas. He was leaving as something more, a teacher who had genuinely connected with students from dozens of species and helped them see their own potential through new eyes. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood, sitting beside him, noticed the contemplative look. Worth it? Absolutely, Marcus replied. You know what the best part is? 10 years from now, some of those cadets are going to be in command positions. And when they face impossible situations, they're going to remember that humans taught them it's okay to try crazy solutions. The galaxy's going to be a more interesting place. Private Rodriguez chimed in from her seat. Think any of them will actually use what we taught them? Some will, Marcus said confidently. Maybe not exactly the way we do things, but they'll take the principles and apply them in their own way. That's all we can ask for. Dr. Martinez, who had been quiet during the departure, finally spoke up. You know what I realized during all this? Military service isn't really about fighting. It's about protecting people and solving problems, and sometimes fighting is just the tool you use to do those things. Those cadets, they're not learning to be warriors. They're learning to be protectors. That's probably the most insightful thing anyone said this entire trip, Blackwood observed. You should consider a career in military education. Document. Absolutely not, Martinez replied with a laugh. I've had enough combat simulations to last me several lifetimes. I'm going back to studying alien microorganisms, which are fascinating, and don't shoot at me. They continued their journey home. For humans who had spent 3 days turning a military academy's understanding of warfare upside down, confident that they'd made a real difference, even if the full impact wouldn't be visible for years to come. Back at the academy, Instructor Valaxis was already planning curriculum changes based on Marcus's demonstrations. The recordings of the 3 scenarios had been added to the Academy's training database, required viewing for all tactical warfare students. A new course was being designed, Adaptive Tactics and Unconventional Warfare, taught by guest instructors from multiple species who specialized in flexible combat approaches. The cadets who had participated in Marcus's demonstrations would graduate as some of the Academy's finest officers, many of them going on to distinguished careers where they would face impossible situations and remember that a human Marine once taught them that impossible just meant nobody had figured out how to do it yet. And somewhere out in the galaxy, future conflicts would be shaped by officers who had learned from both traditional military wisdom and human unconventional thinking, creating a new generation of leaders who understood that the best tactics were the ones your enemy never saw coming. The guest lecture had ended, but its impact would echo through the galactic defense accord for generations to come, proving once again that sometimes the most valuable lessons come not from following established procedures, but from someone willing to challenge them entirely. Thraxus spoke up immediately. We underestimated you. Wrong, Marcus said flatly. That's what everyone says after they lose, but it's not accurate. You didn't underestimate me. You estimated me correctly. 1 human against 40 trained combatants is absolutely a matchup you should win. Your mistake was thinking this was a fair fight. The way he said that last word made every cadet in the room simultaneously curious and concerned. Whatever was coming, they suspected their routine military education was about to become significantly more interesting.